My husband never opened our mail without me, until the day I noticed he'd started doing exactly that, and I told myself it was nothing. That was the first lie I let myself believe. We had been married for 4 years when I started noticing the small things. The way he would get to the mailbox before I did on days he worked from home. The way he'd already sorted everything by the time I came downstairs. Bills on the left, catalogues in the recycling, anything addressed to me set neatly on the kitchen counter. I thought he was being helpful. That was the kind of man I believed I had married. Thoughtful, organised, always one step ahead. His name was Theodore James Calloway, according to the framed wedding photo that still hung above our fireplace in Raleigh. He was a financial analyst at a regional investment firm downtown, the kind of man who wore the same 3 styles of shirt in rotation and knew exactly what the S&P 500 did before he'd finished his first cup of coffee. I was a dental hygienist working 4 days a week at a practice about 12 minutes from our house. We had a mortgage, 2 cars, a rescue dog named Biscuit who slept at the foot of our bed, and what I genuinely believed was a good life. I never thought to question a mail thing until my mother called. She was trying to send me a birthday card with a check inside, nothing big, just the $50 she sent every year, the kind of gesture that meant more for the love behind it than the amount. I told her I hadn't received it. She said she'd mailed it 3 weeks ago. I checked the counter. Nothing. I asked Theo about it that evening while he was washing dishes, and he didn't even turn around. Must have gotten lost, he said. The mail system is a mess lately. I believed him. I let it go. It wasn't until 2 months later, when my best friend from college tried to send me a wedding shower gift, a check to help with the trip she knew I'd been wanting to take, that I started to feel something shift underneath me. She texted asking if I'd gotten it. I hadn't. When I asked Theo, he said maybe she'd sent it to the wrong address. When I pressed her, she read me the address back perfectly. Our address. My name. That night, I lay in bed listening to him breathe, and I thought, what is missing that I'm not seeing? I started paying attention differently after that. Not in an obvious way. I didn't go through his phone or follow him somewhere. I just watched. The way he shuffled through the envelopes before setting them down. The way he would sometimes take a piece of mail to his home office and close the door before coming back out without it. I told myself there were explanations, work correspondence, something sensitive he didn't want to clutter the kitchen with. Theo was private. I'd always known that about him. But the checks hadn't arrived. 2 checks, from 2 different people, both addressed to me, both vanished. I called the bank one Thursday afternoon while Theo was in a meeting. I asked if there had been any deposits made to our joint checking account in the last 60 days from individuals. Not direct deposits, not auto transfers, but paper check deposits. The woman on the phone walked me through it. There were 2. Both for amounts that matched what my mother and my friend had described. Both deposited the same week they would have arrived. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the dental office, and I felt something cold move through me. He had been depositing my checks without telling me. Now, I know what you might be thinking. A joint account. Maybe he just didn't mention it. Maybe it was an oversight. That's what I told myself too on the drive home. That's what I held on to while I made dinner and set the table and listened to him tell me about a client meeting that had gone long. But there was something else I couldn't explain away. The checks had gone into our joint account, yes, but the balance never reflected them. I checked the account on my phone that night after Theo fell asleep, going back through 60 days of transactions, and I found it immediately. Transfers out. Small ones. 200 here, 300 there, to an account number I didn't recognize. A savings account, it looked like, but not one that appeared anywhere in our online banking dashboard. I wrote the account number down on a piece of paper and hid it inside a book on my nightstand. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I drove to our bank branch in person. I waited until Theo had left for work. Then I took the paper with the account number and I walked in and asked to speak with someone about our accounts. The banker who sat down with me, a kind woman with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, pulled up our file and got very quiet for a moment. Mrs. Calloway, she said, there are 3 accounts associated with your name and your husband's. 3, I said. 2 joint, 1 individual. She paused. The individual account is in your name only. I stared at her. I don't have an individual account here. She turned the screen toward me slightly, just enough for me to see. The account had been opened 14 months ago. My name, my social security number, my signature, or what appeared to be my signature on the opening documents. But I had never sat in this bank and opened a savings account 14 months ago. I'd never signed anything like that. I need to know everything about this account, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. The account had a balance of just over $22,000. I drove home in a haze. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I didn't drink, and I tried to think clearly. Theo had opened an account in my name. He had been routing small amounts of money through it, our money, some of it, and also money sent to me by other people. And he had been building something I wasn't supposed to see. Why? Was he hiding money from me? Was he planning to leave and wanted a financial cushion I'd never know to look for? Or was it something else? I thought about the mail. I thought about the checks. I thought about how carefully he had managed to keep me from noticing any of it for over a year. I called my sister that afternoon. She's practical and she doesn't panic, which is exactly what I needed. I told her everything. She was quiet for a long moment and then she said, "You need to talk to someone before you say anything to him." A lawyer? A financial attorney? Or at least someone who knows what this could mean legally before you blow everything up. I made an appointment for the following week. In the meantime, I kept things exactly as they were. I made dinner. I folded laundry. I walked Biscuit and watched television and went to work and came home and did not let a single thing show on my face because the one thing I was certain of was that if Theo knew I had been to the bank, the money would disappear before I could do anything about it. The attorney I met with specialized in marital finances and what she called economic abuse within partnerships. She was direct in a way that felt like cold water on a burn. "What you're describing," she said, "is a pattern. Account opened without your knowledge, using your identity, funds being redirected, financial documentation withheld. In North Carolina, this can constitute marital fraud. Depending on how the funds were obtained and where they came from, there may also be identity theft involved." I hadn't let myself use words like that. Fraud, theft, these were crimes, this was my husband. "How long do you think this has been going on?" she asked. I thought about the mail, the way he always got there first. "Longer than 14 months, I said. "I just can't prove it yet." She told me what to do. I went home and I did it. I spent 2 weeks quietly gathering. I requested my own credit report, the one I hadn't thought to check because Theo always handled our finances and I had trusted him to do it. There were 3 credit cards I didn't recognize, one with a balance of over $11,000, all in my name, all with our home address. The statements, of course, had never arrived in my hands. I found the credit card statements eventually. They were in a fireproof lockbox in the back of Theo's closet, the kind that looks like it's for important documents, passports, birth certificates, that sort of thing. He'd shown it to me when we first moved into the house, told me he kept our important papers there. The combination, he said, was our anniversary date. He'd even winked when he told me that. The combination wasn't our anniversary date anymore. But the lockbox had a key override, and the spare key was on Theo's keyring, which he left on the kitchen hook every morning when he walked in the door. I won't tell you what I felt, sitting on the floor of that closet with the lockbox open across my knees. Shock is the wrong word. It was more like watching a film develop, a photograph you took a long time ago finally coming into focus, and realizing the image was never what you thought you were capturing. There were credit card statements going back 2.5 years. Balances paid down, run back up, paid down again. Transactions at restaurants I'd never been to. Hotels in cities I'd never visited together. A jewelry store in Charlotte. There was a second cell phone bill. A prepaid account tucked under the statements. There was a folded piece of paper that looked like a lease agreement for an apartment in Durham. An apartment, not a hotel. A 12-month lease, signed 8 months ago. And there was a photograph, a woman I didn't know, dark-haired, standing in what looked like a kitchen I'd never been in, holding a coffee mug toward the camera like a toast. On the back, in handwriting I recognized as Theo's, "Home." I put everything back exactly as I'd found it. I took photographs of every document with my phone. I closed the lockbox, put the key back on the ring, and made dinner. I called my attorney the next morning. The process that followed was not fast. I want to be honest about that because I've seen enough movies and television to know that's not how it works in real life. There was no confrontation scene where I slammed evidence on a table and he crumbled. There were weeks of legal preparation. My attorney filed for a financial freeze on the account opened in my name. She contacted the credit bureaus about the fraudulent cards. She worked with a forensic accountant who traced the money, where it had come from, where it had gone, how long the pattern had been running. 3 years. The forensic accountant found evidence going back 3 years to just before we got engaged. He had never been the person I thought he was. Or maybe he had been, and something had shifted, and I hadn't noticed because I hadn't wanted to. My sister came to stay with me the week I filed the paperwork. My mother drove up from Wilmington. I hadn't told them everything until then. I'd wanted to be sure of what I had before I said the words out loud to the people who loved me. When I finally sat them down at the kitchen table and told them, my mother pressed her lips together very hard and looked at the wall for a moment before she spoke. "The checks," she said. "Yes." She nodded slowly like something was settling into place for her too. When Theo was formally notified, he didn't come home that night. He called my cell phone instead, and I let it go to voicemail. The message was a version of things I had expected. Disbelief. Then indignation. Then something that sounded almost like grief but felt rehearsed. He said I had misunderstood. He said he had been protecting me. He said the account was supposed to be a surprise, a savings fund for a trip we talked about taking. He said the credit cards were a mistake he'd been trying to fix. He said he could explain the apartment. He didn't explain the apartment. My attorney had advised me not to engage, and I didn't. What I felt instead of anger in those early days was something closer to exhaustion. The kind that comes not from doing too much, but from realizing how long you've been carrying something you didn't know was heavy. The legal process took 7 months. There was a divorce proceeding and a parallel civil fraud case. The fraudulent credit accounts were disputed and largely resolved. The banks, once presented with the forensic evidence, were cooperative. The apartment in Durham had been leased in his name, not mine, so there was no additional identity fraud there, but it became part of the divorce proceedings in terms of marital asset division. The $22,000 in the account opened in my name was frozen and eventually returned to the marital estate and divided accordingly. Theo did not go to prison. I want to be honest about that too, because I know that's what you want to hear and I understand why. What he did was wrong. It was calculated and deliberate and it stretched across years of our life together. But the criminal identity theft charge was ultimately reduced as part of a plea agreement and he received probation and was ordered to pay restitution. Our family law attorney told me that outcomes like this are more common than people realize. The legal system, when it comes to financial abuse within marriages, is complicated. It doesn't always give you the ending that feels proportionate. What I can tell you is this. When the divorce was finalized, I sat in my attorney's office and signed my name on the last document, and I noticed that my hand was completely steady. I noticed that I felt, for the first time in longer than I could exactly identify, like the ground under my feet was solid. I sold the house. I didn't want to live in it anymore. Not because it was haunted exactly, but because every room in it had become a place where I now understood something had been hidden from me. The kitchen where he'd sorted the mail, the closet where the lockbox had sat, the bedroom where I'd lain awake listening to him breathe and told myself the feeling in my chest was just anxiety, just me being anxious again, just something I needed to work through on my own. I moved into an apartment about 20 minutes from where I work. It's smaller, the closets are shallower. There's a window above the kitchen sink that looks out onto a small courtyard, and in the mornings I stand there with my coffee and watch the light come in and I feel, mostly, okay. My mother's checks arrive now. I get them out of the mailbox myself. Biscuit mercifully came with me. He has adjusted to apartment life with a philosophical ease I genuinely envy. He sleeps at the foot of my bed still, and sometimes in the middle of the night I reach down and put my hand on his back and just breathe for a while. There are things I've had to sit with that I wasn't prepared for. The question of how I didn't know sooner, I've turned that one over 100 times. The answer I've arrived at is that I knew something. I felt something more than once in the small moments. But I had built a story about my life and my marriage, and I kept choosing to fit the evidence into that story rather than letting the evidence change the story. I think a lot of people do this. I don't say that to excuse it. I say it because if you're reading this and you're in the middle of your own version of it, that low-level feeling that something doesn't add up, that you keep explaining away, I want you to know that the feeling is worth paying attention to. You are not being dramatic, you are not being paranoid, you are noticing something real. The mail thing, the checks, the bank account, the lockbox, none of those were the problem on their own. The problem was that for years, I had a husband who understood that the easiest way to control someone is to make them feel like they're imagining it. And I was a person who very much wanted to believe that my life was what I thought it was. I don't live that way anymore. The courtyard outside my kitchen window has a small maple tree in the corner. It's young, thin trunk, not much shade yet. But this past October, the leaves turned a colour I can only describe as the most honest orange I've ever seen, and I stood at that sink and looked at it for probably 10 minutes running, and I thought, this is mine, this view, this morning, this quiet. Nobody sorted this for me. Nobody decided what I was allowed to see. I'm rebuilding things slowly. My credit score took time to repair. My sense of my own judgment took longer, but both are coming back. And I think they're coming back stronger for having been tested. That's the thing they don't tell you about surviving something like this. It doesn't leave you fragile. It leaves you precise. You learn exactly what you're willing to overlook and what you're not. And the answer, going forward, is much shorter than it used to be. I still check the mail every day. It's a small thing, but it's mine. I think about the lockbox sometimes. Not with anger anymore. More like the way you think about a splinter you finally got out. The relief isn't dramatic, it's just quiet and clean and real. What Theo did wasn't a mistake. That's the part I had to sit with the longest. Mistakes are things that happen in a moment of poor judgment. What he did was constructed over years with patience and precision. He understood exactly which details to manage and which to leave visible. He understood that if he kept me comfortable enough, I wouldn't go looking, and for a long time he was right. I don't say that to be hard on myself. I say it because I think it matters to name it clearly. He made a choice, again and again, to deceive someone who trusted him. That choice had consequences, not because the universe has some automatic system of punishment, but because deception at that scale requires a person to keep building, keep managing, keep controlling. And the more you build on a false foundation, the more inevitable it becomes that something will crack and the whole structure will show itself for what it is. Theo's system cracked the moment my mother called about a $50 birthday check. That's how fragile it actually was. I think about integrity a lot these days, not as a concept but as a practical thing, as a daily choice. Theo was intelligent. Nobody who could maintain that kind of financial architecture for 3 years is unintelligent. But intelligence without integrity doesn't build anything real. It just builds something that looks real from the outside, for as long as the person maintaining it can keep up the performance. The moment I stopped performing the role of a wife who didn't look too closely, the whole thing came apart. What carried me through wasn't certainty. I want to be honest about that. There were weeks during those 7 months when I wasn't sure I was doing the right thing, when the legal process felt endless and the isolation felt crushing. What carried me through was something simpler and harder than certainty. It was just the decision to keep going anyway, to make the next appointment, to show up to the next meeting, to not stop moving just because I couldn't yet see the end of it. That kind of persistence isn't glamorous. It doesn't feel like strength while you're in it. It feels like putting one foot in front of the other in the dark, but it compounds. Each step makes the next one slightly easier, and eventually you look back and realize how far you've actually come. My sister said something to me near the end of the process that I keep coming back to. She said, "You didn't get through this because you're exceptional. You got through this because you refused to stop." I think she's right. And I think that's actually more useful than being exceptional. Exceptional is something you either have or you don't. Refusing to stop is a choice available to anyone. The maple tree outside my kitchen window has new leaves on it now, small and bright and almost embarrassingly green. I stood at the sink this morning and looked at it for a long time, and I thought about how much can change in a year when you stop arranging your life around someone else's secrets. I check the mail every day. I open everything addressed to me. It sounds like nothing. It is everything.